Evelyn Moore, Marcus Hale, and Lucas Reed were never meant to cross paths, yet one quiet decision pulled their lives into a single story of trust, deception, and a secret powerful enough to destroy an entire criminal network in the United States. Please subscribe for daily new update of crime story and watch till end. Evelyn Moore lived a quiet and carefully planned life in a small town in Oregon, far from busy cities and crowded streets. Her house stood at the edge of the neighborhood, surrounded by tall trees and narrow roads that stayed silent most of the year. She chose this place because it felt safe and distant from trouble. Every morning followed the same routine, and every night ended the same way, with lights turned off early and doors double-checked before sleep. She worked as a caregiver for elderly people, a job that demanded patience and emotional strength. Many of the people she helped had no family left, and over time, Evelyn became used to being the only person they relied on. This shaped her nature. She learned to listen more than speak, and to give help without expecting anything in return. Kindness became her habit, not a choice. Years earlier, Evelyn had lost her parents in a sudden accident. After that, her siblings moved away and contact slowly faded. The silence that followed stayed with her. She filled it with work, long walks, and small routines that kept her mind busy. Friends described her as gentle but distant, someone who avoided attention and drama. She never involved herself in other people's conflicts and trusted that staying invisible kept her safe. Her house reflected her personality. It was clean, simple, and almost empty. One spare room remained unused, holding only an old bed and a wooden dresser. She often thought about renting it out, but hesitated. Letting someone into her private space felt risky, yet the rising cost of living and her single income made the idea harder to ignore. Evelyn believed strongly in second chances. Over the years, she had seen people regret their past mistakes and try to rebuild their lives. This belief came from watching broken people slowly find peace. She trusted that change was always possible if someone truly wanted it. That belief shaped her decisions more than logic ever did. Despite her calm life, loneliness followed her quietly. Evenings felt longer than they should, and weekends passed without conversation. She convinced herself that solitude was peaceful, but deep down, she missed human presence. She missed simple sounds, footsteps in the house, and the feeling that someone else existed nearby. When she finally decided to rent the spare room, she did not imagine danger. She imagined company, shared space, and maybe a small connection to the outside world. She told herself she was strong, careful, and capable of handling any situation. What she did not know was that this one decision would pull her into a world she had only seen on television, a world of secrets, crime, and fear that would soon tear apart the quiet life she worked so hard to protect. The decision to rent out the spare room happened quietly, without excitement or second thoughts. Evelyn posted a short notice on a local board and online listing, keeping the details simple. She asked for nothing more than basic respect, steady payment, and a peaceful arrangement. Within a day, several responses arrived, but one message stood out for its careful tone and lack of unnecessary detail. The man who contacted her introduced himself as Lucas Reed. He claimed he was passing through the area for work and needed a temporary place to stay. His message was polite, direct, and free of personal stories. There were no complaints, no emotional appeals, and no pressure. Evelyn found that reassuring. She agreed to meet him in a public place near her home during the daytime. Lucas arrived exactly on time. He was well dressed but plain, blending easily into the background. There was nothing memorable about his appearance, which somehow made him easier to trust. He spoke little and answered questions without hesitation, never offering more information than necessary. He said he worked in construction and preferred to keep to himself after long days of physical labor. Evelyn noticed how carefully he observed his surroundings. His eyes moved slowly, taking in exits, windows, and passing cars. She assumed it was the habit of someone who had lived in many places. When she asked about references, he explained that most of his recent work had been short-term and paid in cash. The explanation felt reasonable, especially in a town where temporary jobs were common. They walked back to the house together. Lucas remained respectful, never stepping too close and never touching anything without permission. When shown the spare room, he nodded in approval and asked practical questions about utilities, quiet hours, and storage space. He paid the first month's rent in cash that same evening, neatly folded and counted without mistake. From the first night, Lucas kept to himself. He arrived late, left early, and made almost no noise. He cooked simple meals and cleaned up immediately after. Evelyn rarely saw him watching television or using the internet. His phone was old, with no visible apps beyond basic functions. He never invited guests and never shared details about his past. There was a sense of control in everything he did. His shoes were always placed in the same position near the door. His jacket hung in the same spot every night. His routines never changed. Evelyn told herself this was a sign of discipline, not danger. Having someone else in the house brought an unfamiliar feeling. The silence felt different now, heavier at times, but less lonely. She convinced herself that this arrangement was working. She believed she had opened her home to a man trying to rebuild his life. What she could not see was that Lucas Reed was not seeking shelter from hardship, but hiding from something far more serious that was slowly moving closer. At first, the changes in the house were so small that Evelyn questioned whether she was imagining them. The air felt heavier, as if the walls were holding something unseen. Lucas continued to follow his strict routine, but certain details began to stand out once Evelyn paid closer attention. She noticed that he never stayed home during daylight hours on weekends, even when the weather was bad. He left before sunrise and returned long after dark, carrying nothing with him. Strange sounds began to appear at night. They were not loud, but they were steady and deliberate. Low scraping noises traveled through the floor, followed by short metallic clicks. The sounds always stopped when Evelyn moved from her bedroom, as if they were carefully timed. When she asked herself what kind of work could produce those noises, no reasonable answer came to mind. Evelyn started noticing marks on Lucas's body when he passed through shared spaces. His hands showed burns that looked old but deep, not the kind caused by cooking or construction. Thin scars crossed his forearms, uneven and faded, suggesting injuries that had healed badly. He wore long sleeves even in warm weather, and when he did not, he moved in a way that avoided being observed too closely. Outside the house, unfamiliar activity began to appear. Cars Evelyn had never seen before slowed near her driveway, sometimes stopping for a moment before continuing down the road. They never parked. They never returned immediately. It was as if someone was checking the location rather than visiting it. This happened more than once, always at different times, always with different vehicles. Inside the home, things shifted slightly out of place. Tools appeared in the garage that Evelyn did not own and had never used. Heavy gloves, thick wires, and containers without labels sat neatly arranged as if they belonged there. When she checked her storage boxes, nothing was missing, yet none of these items were hers. The electricity bill doubled without explanation. Lights were not left on, and appliances were used normally. The increase felt mechanical, not accidental. Late at night, Evelyn could feel a faint vibration through the floor beneath her feet, subtle but constant, like something operating just out of sight. Her instincts told her something was wrong, but logic argued back. Lucas had done nothing openly threatening. He paid rent on time, respected boundaries, and avoided conflict. Evelyn feared being unfair, worried that suspicion might be a product of her isolation rather than reality. She reminded herself that she had chosen to trust. Still, unease settled deep within her. Sleep came slowly, and when it did, it was shallow. Every sound felt sharper, every shadow heavier. Evelyn began locking her bedroom door, a habit she had never needed before. Without realizing it, she was already preparing for a truth she was not yet ready to face. The locked room became the center of Evelyn's growing fear. From the beginning, Lucas had made it clear that his space was private, but over time, that privacy turned into secrecy. The door to his room was always shut, and a solid lock had been installed without discussion. Evelyn noticed that the lock was not an ordinary one. It was thick, reinforced, and designed for strength rather than convenience. Late at night, the sounds returned, stronger than before. Heavy movements echoed through the walls, followed by dull impacts that vibrated through the floor. At times, a low mechanical hum filled the hallway, steady and controlled, lasting for hours. Whatever was happening behind that door was not simple storage or personal work. It felt planned and ongoing. Evelyn tried to avoid passing the room, but the house layout made it impossible. Each time she walked by, her chest tightened. The air near the door felt warmer, carrying a faint metallic smell that lingered longer than it should have. She cleaned more often. Hopping movement and noise might make her feel less trapped, but the tension remained. One afternoon, while Lucas was away, Evelyn entered the garage to organize her tools. That was when she found items that made no sense. Thick plastic sheets were folded neatly in a corner. Heavy-duty tape and sealed containers were stacked behind old boxes. None of these items had been there before. They were hidden carefully, not forgotten. She checked the storage shed next. Inside, the floor showed fresh scratches, deep and uneven, as if something heavy had been dragged across it recently. Dirt had been disturbed, then smoothed back into place. It looked intentional, like an attempt to erase evidence of movement. Evelyn considered calling someone for advice, but stopped herself. She had no proof, only feelings and observations. Fear of being wrong kept her silent. She told herself that accusing someone without facts could destroy a life. That belief had guided her for years, and now it worked against her. The sounds grew more frequent. Sometimes they continued until dawn. Evelyn stopped using certain areas of the house, adjusting her routines to avoid crossing paths with the locked door. She ate meals in her room and kept lights low, hoping to feel invisible in her own home. What unsettled her most was Lucas's behavior outside the room. He remained calm, controlled, and unchanged. There were no visible signs of stress or urgency. His ability to separate whatever he was doing from the rest of his life made everything feel more dangerous. It suggested experience. By the end of the week, Evelyn understood that the room was not just private space. It was a barrier between her and something hidden, something deliberate. The house no longer felt like shelter. It felt like a structure built around a secret that was slowly tightening its grip. The moment of realization did not arrive suddenly. It crept in slowly, carried by coincidence rather than intention. One evening, after a long day of work, Evelyn stepped outside to take out the trash. A nearby house had its curtains open, and the glow of a television flickered against the dark street. She barely noticed it at first, but a familiar shape on the screen made her pause. The program appeared to be a crime documentary. The images were grainy, showing old surveillance footage and still photos taken from a distance. As the segment continued, the camera focused on a man whose face felt disturbingly familiar. His hairline, his posture, and the sharp stillness in his expression matched someone Evelyn had seen every day inside her own home. Her heart began to race as she stood frozen in place. The documentary described a former gang enforcer linked to organized crime across several states. The man had vanished years earlier after internal conflict within the gang. Authorities believed he had taken sensitive information and large amounts of money before disappearing. His real name was not Lucas Reed. Evelyn returned inside slowly, locking the door behind her. She tried to convince herself she was mistaken. Faces could look alike, memory could be unreliable, but once the idea took hold, it refused to leave. She replayed every detail she had ignored before: the scars, the secrecy, the strict routines, the cash payments. None of it felt harmless anymore. That night, sleep did not come. Instead, Evelyn searched public records and archived news articles on her laptop. She avoided recent sites, choosing older sources that matched the timeline described in the documentary. The more she read, the more the pieces aligned. The man she had opened her home to had not been hiding from a difficult past. He had been hiding from justice. She compared photos carefully, studying angles and shadows. The resemblance was undeniable. Even attempts to change appearance could not erase certain features. The structure of the face, the eyes, the presence, everything matched. Fear settled into her chest, heavy and cold. She realized that the locked room, the tools, and the strange activity were not random. They were part of survival, not her survival, but his. She understood now that her home had become a shield placed between a dangerous man and the consequences he had escaped. Evelyn felt trapped by her own silence. Reporting him could put her in danger. Staying quiet meant living beside someone capable of violence. Every choice felt wrong. She questioned every moment of kindness she had offered, wondering how easily trust could be used as cover. As dawn approached, she made a decision without clarity or comfort. She would observe, she would wait, and she would protect herself the only way she knew how, by understanding exactly who was living behind that locked door. With the truth now impossible to ignore, Evelyn began to see her surroundings differently. Every object in the house seemed to carry weight, as if it had been placed there for a reason she was only now beginning to understand. The calm routines that once felt harmless now appeared calculated. Lucas Reed was a name carefully chosen, a mask worn with patience and discipline. Evelyn spent her days pretending nothing had changed. Inside, however, she was mapping every detail. She tracked his comings and goings, noting times and patterns without writing anything down. She avoided electronic notes, fearing that anything connected to the house could be monitored. Caution became instinct. One afternoon, while Lucas was away longer than usual, Evelyn noticed something unusual beneath the living room rug. The floor felt uneven, slightly raised in one corner. She moved the furniture carefully and lifted the rug just enough to see faint seams in the wooden boards. The cuts were clean and deliberate, not part of the original construction. Her hands trembled as she replaced everything exactly as it was. She did not open the floor. She did not need to. The message was clear. Something had been hidden there, or still was. The locked room upstairs was not the only secret the house was holding. In the garage, she noticed dirt patterns that no longer matched the weather. Soil had been brought in, not tracked from outside. It was dry and fine, swept into corners, but never fully removed. The shed showed signs of reinforcement beneath its floor, wood added where none was needed. These were not random changes. They were preparations. Evelyn realized that Marcus Hale, the man behind the false name, was not just hiding. He was storing something valuable enough to risk exposure. It could not be ordinary money. Cash could be moved easily. This required structure, concealment, and time. The realization brought a new kind of fear. If others were searching for what he had taken, then she was already involved, whether she wanted to be or not. Her home was no longer neutral ground. It was a target. She recalled the documentary's mention of stolen evidence. Information capable of destroying powerful people did not disappear quietly. It attracted attention. It attracted violence. Evelyn understood now why the cars had passed the house, why the tools were specialized, why the power usage had increased. That night she sat alone in the dark, listening to the familiar hum beneath the floor. It no longer sounded mysterious. It sounded intentional. Whatever was hidden in her home was active, protected, and connected to a past that had not stayed buried. Evelyn knew the secret now, even without seeing it fully. Her kindness had unknowingly sheltered a man guarding something dangerous, and once a secret reaches that level, it does not stay hidden for long. The final night arrived without warning, heavy with a sense of inevitability that Evelyn felt the moment she woke up. The air inside the house felt tense, charged, as if something long delayed was finally moving. Lucas left earlier than usual that morning, his movements precise and hurried, though his expression remained controlled. Evelyn understood that whatever balance had existed was breaking. As evening fell, the neighborhood grew unusually quiet. No distant traffic, no barking dogs, no familiar sounds. The silence felt artificial, like a pause before impact. Evelyn stayed in her room, lights off, listening carefully. Every minute stretched longer than the last. Just after midnight, the unfamiliar cars returned. This time they did not slow down and leave. They stopped. Engines remained running, low and steady. Shadows moved outside the windows, deliberate and coordinated. Evelyn's heart pounded as she realized these were not curious strangers or law enforcement. This was the past catching up. Inside the house, movement erupted. The locked room door opened for the first time since Lucas had arrived. Heavy footsteps crossed the hallway. Objects were dragged, not carefully now, but urgently. The calm discipline was gone, replaced by desperation. Evelyn understood that Marcus Hale had realized he was no longer hidden. The stolen evidence, the materials beneath the floor, the reinforced spaces, all of it had become a liability. He was preparing to leave, or destroy what he could not take. Before anything could escalate further, bright lights flooded the property. The silence shattered under the weight of authority. Federal agents surrounded the house from every direction, their presence overwhelming and unmistakable. The moment had been building for weeks, maybe years, and it had finally reached its end. Marcus Hale did not resist. The careful control he had maintained for so long dissolved into stillness. He was taken into custody before violence could erupt, before Evelyn could become collateral damage in a conflict she never chose. The house was searched thoroughly. Floorboards were lifted, walls examined, and hidden compartments exposed. Beneath Evelyn's living room, agents recovered digital storage devices, documents, and records tied to multiple criminal operations across the country. The humming machines were servers, quietly preserving information powerful enough to bring down an entire network. Evelyn watched from a distance as her home was stripped of its secrets, relief mixed with shock. The danger had been real, closer than she ever imagined. She realized how narrowly she had escaped becoming a victim simply by offering kindness to the wrong person. As dawn approached, the house stood open and exposed, no longer hiding anything. The night ended not with violence, but with truth, and though the threat was gone, Evelyn knew that the quiet life she once had could never return in the same way. The days after the arrest passed slowly, marked by official procedures and long periods of waiting. Evelyn remained in temporary housing while investigators continued their work. Her home, once a place of comfort, had become evidence. Agents moved in and out, documenting every corner, removing equipment, and sealing items that had been hidden for years. The familiarity of the space was gone, replaced by caution tape and locked doors. Authorities questioned Evelyn multiple times, always with the same calm professionalism. They examined her financial records, her communication history, and her daily routines. Every detail of her life was reviewed. Though she had done nothing wrong, the process was exhausting. She answered carefully, knowing how easily misunderstanding could change everything. In the end, the truth worked in her favor. Her cooperation and lack of involvement were clear. News of the arrest spread quickly. The small town reacted with disbelief. Neighbors who had barely noticed Evelyn before now whispered her name with curiosity and fear. Reporters appeared, hoping for statements she refused to give. She wanted no part of attention. Silence had protected her once, and she hoped it would again. The evidence recovered from her home led to arrests in several states. Marcus Hale's stolen records exposed financial operations, trafficking routes, and internal betrayals within the criminal organization he once served. His attempt to protect himself by hiding the truth had instead guaranteed its release. The secret he guarded so carefully became the reason his world collapsed. When Evelyn was finally allowed to return home, the house felt unfamiliar. Floors had been cut and repaired. Walls showed marks where hidden spaces had been opened. The quiet remained, but it was no longer peaceful. Every room carried memories of fear and uncertainty. She understood then that staying would mean reliving the experience every day. Within weeks, she sold the property and left town. She chose a place where no one knew her story, where her name carried no weight. She returned to caregiving, but with clearer boundaries and stronger caution. Kindness remained part of her, but it was no longer blind. Evelyn learned that danger does not always arrive loudly. Sometimes it comes politely, carrying cash and a calm smile. She never stopped believing in helping others, but she learned to listen to the quiet warnings she once ignored. The story ended without celebration. There was no victory, only survival. Evelyn did not see herself as brave or heroic. She was simply someone who trusted, learned, and walked away before trust became tragedy.